Welcome to episode 456 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and joining me today is Domagoj Kostanjšak. Everybody knows Domagoj, and thanks so much for doing the show again.
I'm glad to be here, Dan, as always. Let's get straight into it.
Well, it's usually the case when you come on. That means that you don't even get to review matches. I just ask these big wandering questions of you. And today, well, we got another one here, and is not only what is the point of Barcelona's wingers, because why don't they just play with all midfielders and Lewandowski in a back line? Why even play wingers at all, depending on what they're able to contribute and produce, and we'll talk about that. But what is their function in Xavi's system moving forward for the rest of this season? What have they tried to do this year? And then where is that position going next year? Because that's a question that we're already beginning to ask. And I think where we start is, we'll say the only one who's rather healthy and in the starting lineup regularly, and that would be Raphinha. Because right now, again, I think he is that Ansu and Ferran Torres are not trusted to start regularly. And then Dembele, of course, is injured right now. We'll talk about him in a second. But Raphinha is where we begin, because after Girona, I was asking quite a lot about the function of he and Lewandowski together, the function of him without Dembele in tow, whether it's Dembele on the left and it is just Raphinha on the right starting. It is the level of Raphinha. It is what he can do against the Adafes, and I mean what he didn't do against Girona, but what he can do against the bottom half of Liga, as opposed to what he hasn't done and can't do against Champions League opponents. So as far as Raphinha, I've got the numbers here, some of them that tell the truth, some of them that lie. I'm going to bore everybody with that first, but yeah, it's been a while since I got your impressions of Raphinha after you spoke quite a lot about him with Twitter threads and the like. So where do you see Raphinha at this moment right now with FC Barcelona?
Well, I think the numbers that you mentioned, so his output, his goals and assists, so goal contributions have been high. So there's no denying that. So whenever we think about him as a player, and I do think that he has certain limitations that people are starting to get aware of, I think it would be unfair of us to say that he's not been good, because he's been good. He's been good on numerous occasions. He's been a match winner even on numerous occasions. I think that needs to be said. That needs to be respected even in a sense. But I think that where the trouble begins to kind of show is when people start and compare him with Dembele, and that's because we see Raphinha as this direct replacement for Dembele. So when Dembele is absent, we have Raphinha. So that's the kind of the general consensus of the team, or the fan base, I should say. But they're not really the same players, right? So if you use them both in the same way, you won't get the same results. That's as simple as I can put it just now. So Xavi loves this idea of having these wide wingers. At least that's what he used to have. That was the initial idea, having two wide wingers and maintaining this maximum width at all times, and having this overload to isolate tactic, which is what Barca do best, but which is what their best weapon is at the moment, I would say. So overload the left side, which is the build-up heavy side, and then switch play to the right side where you have the isolated winger, and then that winger has to do the 1-versus-1 thing, and then he has to create something out of that from that position, right? So we are putting Raphinha in Dembele's shoes basically when we use him this way, because that's what Dembele does. That's what he does best. If you give Dembele open space, if you give Dembele that isolation, and you count on his 1-versus-1 ability, his ability to kind of blitz past his marker and conquer the space, that's where you get the results from Dembele, but not necessarily Raphinha. I think Raphinha is a kind of a different player. I think I've come to realize that when you compare maximum width to minimum width, I would say that Raphinha is the minimum width player. He is the one that starts wide, but he has to finish narrow. He has to finish closer to goal. He has to be closer to box to begin with. And if you put him in a position where he has to conquer a lot of space, you emphasize his 1-versus-1 quality, which is not bad, by the way. He's a good dribbler, but he's not Dembele. Then he will suffer. I think you have to create a setup in which he is more of the facilitator of that isolation than the executor, if that makes sense. So he has to be the one. Maybe he has to be the one deploying those diagonal balls for, let's say, for Balde or Jordi Alba. He has to be the one who either gets to be the direct threat on goal, or the one who gets to facilitate that isolation on the other side. And this is what Jordi Alba and Balde come into play, because you have to have someone on the other side to facilitate that play. You have to have someone who can time the run perfectly and complement Raphinha. Basically, what I'm saying is, Barca with Raphinha, Barca should recreate the Messi Alba connection, because that's what Raphinha can do. He has to cut onto his left foot. We know that he has to get in that right half space on the right side, and he will then deploy passes, either diagonal balls or entering crosses into the box, similar to what Messi has done so many times in the past. So I think getting him in that situation would be more beneficial to him than just putting him in Dembele's shoes and expecting him to do the same things as Dembele in the same setup as Dembele. I feel like that might be the issue with Raphinha, because as good as he is, and I think there is quality in Raphinha, obviously, but he is much more limited, much more predictable, and his ceiling is not as high as Dembele, where Dembele is sort of the ceiling raiser for the whole team. He is the one who does the impossible and the extraordinary, not consistently, of course, but he does it. Raphinha he's not a player with such high highs, I would say.
Yeah. Well, just for starters, I think the idea of Raphinha, when bought by Barcelona for the number they were, expectations wise, I think it's going to be a theme with Barcelona that if that left wing spot in a 4-3-3, because we're going to talk about formation and Gabi is the inside forward, if that 4-3-3 winger spot in the left winger position was getting any contributions whatsoever, was getting anything positive, I think the response to Raphinha would be a lot different, because you're right. Like, what is Raphinha? And this is the defense I've had of him, if you will, all season long, is that he has come up with some pretty important goals and important moments. And those, when you just read off goals or read off assists or whatever, you don't read off when it happens, right? I think in basketball, they have this thing about clutch shots, right? And there's the Sacramento Kings, who's a 3 seed this year in the NBA playoffs. Their point guard, De'Aaron Fox, has kind of never been important in that category, but he blew everybody out of the water this year. And they finished as a 3 seed and they won a bunch of games. And that's almost an underrated stat for him. But that's also now, by people in the know, is an importantly inflated category in saying this is the significance of that player. And in the case of Raphinha, it's not even his goal contributions. It's when those goals came. It's in those moments that they came. And so, as has been the case with Raphinha, his defensive work rate also really doesn't show up in stats, and it doesn't show up in the eye test either, because again, he contributes, and forwards don't get credit for the clean sheets. The defenders and the goalie do, but his work rate has helped contribute to all those clean sheets in the league as well. As much as Barcelona have had luck, they've made their luck by working hard, including their wingers, which hasn't always been the case, especially on the press in recent years. And so what Raphinha has been doing is being a player that is of the caliber and consistent enough with his goal contributions to help Barcelona win the Liga. And has been the case for the last few weeks. There are a lot of players in this Barcelona team, and as they have a referendum for Xavi's project in the Copa del Rey after the 4-0 loss, there's this idea that there's a number of players who are good enough to have helped them win the Liga, but are not good enough for the next phase of that project, which we're going to talk about in the second half of the show. And where I continue to say that is with Raphinha in the Liga, where he has looked just fine in the Liga, because here are the numbers where the stats and the eye test don't really fit together, but it's the same big puzzle here. Raphinha has the same goals and assists as Dembele in the Liga. 6 goals, 4 assists, compared to Dembele's 5 and 5. But and this is going to be a stat that I'm going to keep referencing here, his expected non-penalty goals plus expected assists is 12.3, just less than double of Dembele's of 6.6 in that same category, right? Which is a shocking number. Torres and Ansu are both at 7.5, which is pretty crazy to think too, higher than Dembele. Then I'm just saying that as something to bring up later. Now, the one stat that does bear fruit is goals plus assists per 90. That's 0.63 for Raphinha, 0.82 for Dembele, which does make more sense. It's an 0.32 for Ferran Torres, which again makes sense, and an 0.58 for Ansu Fati, which feels a bit high based on the expectations we put on Ansu. And I think that goals plus assists per 90 for forwards, it doesn't work so much for midfielders where you're saying, well, what is their actual real function? But with forwards, where your job is to score goals or get assists or be a part of that attacking contributions, I feel like that goals plus assists per 90 is really important to speak of that. And then just looking at goals and assist contributions, right? Overall, and I keep bringing this up since the day he was signed, Raphinha has contributed 9 goals and 9 assists in 40 games, which is much better than his 3 goals and 7 assists in 36 games last season for Leeds, and around the 8 goals and 11 assists from the year before he really popped off as a 24-year-old. And so for Raphinha, signed at 25, now 26, having turned 26 in December, you talk about his ceiling, right? This is exactly who he is. And I think the introduction to the Brazilian national team, becoming a part of that, it got you the sense, making the jump from Leeds to Barcelona as well, where you'd expect in the Liga he would get a lot more chances. He'd be able to contribute more numerically, that would be a jump. But it isn't a jump, and it hasn't been a jump. And I think functionally, as I mentioned on that last show, you talk about Ferran Torres and Ansu and Dembele. If Ferran Torres and Ansu contributed anything from that left side, I think Barcelona fans would almost say you have to keep Raphinha. But because they've gotten such an albatross of darkness from that left wing, it seems like Raphinha, based on the transfer stuff that might come in, including who we'll talk about in a second, Lionel Messi, that Raphinha has to be the odd man out because functionally, as you just mentioned, Dembele fixed the function of the right wing position for Barcelona, and you cannot possibly fit Dembele because he can also play on the left, remember, too. So that solves a lot of problems if Messi's coming in tow, whether he plays midfield or right wing. Either way, having Raphinha with Messi might not work out. With the left-footedness, with both of their desire to come in from the right to the left, I don't know how that overlaps. And Raphinha and Lewandowski, I think that was the metric that Raphinha had to jump over that line. The Dembele, for as little contributions as he might give, he improves and makes Lewandowski more dangerous in ways that are not trackable with numbers. But Raphinha does not raise the ceiling. Even, I know Lewandowski is injured, but even when he was rotating with Dembele, I don't think Raphinha raised the ceiling of Lewandowski. He came up big in important moments for him, but I don't know how much he raises the ceiling of the entire team. And that is a concern and a consideration for Raphinha. Now, I think if you want to, Domagoj, you can kind of move over to Dembele and Ansu and Ferran. You not say we're done with Raphinha, but it all just kind of work together. I think that's my verdict on Raphinha, that expectations are certainly underwhelming and frustrating. But again, he almost has done what he was bought for a team that just wanted to win the Liga. Just like I said on the earlier show this week, everybody who was bought was to win the Liga. And that is what Barcelona is going to do. The goal was also to make the group stage of the next knockouts of the Champions League. Yeah. And this group failed to do that. So based on those expectations, Raphinha still does not look at the end of the season like a player that should have helped Barcelona reach those knockouts. He looks like the player that was in the Europa League.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason why he is as you said, the odd man out. And he is someone who still has some... He is still marketable. He can still be sold for, I would guess, for a significant sum. And there are clubs, bigger clubs, who are reportedly interested. I'm not sure how true that is, but he should be able to fetch with a hefty sum, not a hefty sum, but he should be able to fetch at least something for Barca. And if we're truly looking at Messi, there will have to be cuts. I mean, there will have to be cuts regardless of Messi, but Raphinha definitely looks like someone who would be sold in that situation. And yeah, as you said, he might not be the ceiling raiser that Dembele is. And that's the big thing, given Dembele's immense individual quality, which you cannot really compare that to Raphinha. His absence was always going to impact the team. When it comes to such players like Dembele or Pedri, even, the drop in quality that follows their absence is, it's inevitable even. So simply put, they are the difference makers, players that do extraordinary things other players cannot do, and that makes them invaluable. And in that way, they are the ceiling raisers, I would say.
Well, and by the way, let me almost not even push back on the Dembele point, but what's interesting is that Dembele, again, statistically, it's about that eye test and the stats. That eye test wise, Raphinha is hot garbage and Dembele is really successful. But again, a reminder that people hate Dembele. Yeah. Do not let the heart grow fonder because he's sitting in the stands, right? Like he was really good in the second half of last season. Full stop. And he was important to the function of Xavi's Barcelona in the times that he's been on the field, all 28 games he has played, right? But also, statistically, Dembele does not get those big moment goals, does not get those big moment assists. And if Barcelona stink, Dembele is usually having a stink of a match too. And there's a lot of times that Dembele goes missing. So I just want to say, I'm also not throwing shade on Dembele. Dembele is the starting right winger for this team, and he is that second most important member of the front three, which again is probably not a compliment to everyone else, but behind Lewandowski, it is Dembele. I agree. Again, the function of this team is so essential to what Dembele gives you. But again, I just want to speak it out that his 8 goals and 7 assists this year in 28 games is not sufficient enough for who should be your number 2 offensive option, right? That output is not enough for him to have reached 15 total goal contribution. You'd expect that your number 2 is going to be somewhere between 20 and 25. If your top is going to be between 25 and 35, which is what Lewandowski's hitting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually very interesting because, well, Dembele, I think that the difference that you can see between them is in those moments where Barca cannot do anything. As you said, usually Dembele is he's also kind of having a stinker if Barca as a team are having a stinker. But in those moments, I would say that Dembele has the magic moment in him. Raphinha, on the other hand, while he can produce like a direct threat on goal, I would say he would be the one to maybe out of nowhere just fire one from the edge of the box or something like that and score a goal. But I think Dembele has more of those magical moments in him, something out of nothing moments, like Messi-like moments. Maybe not on that level, but I don't know if Raphinha has that in his locker, right? And you would, looking at their both profiles, like what they have, what they're good at, what they're bad at, I would still say that Dembele has more characteristics of a like a totally top of the top elite winger than Raphinha has, and it just putting Dembele in this Barca team should on paper be easier than Raphinha because he is versatile, but he's also elite in so many things, or at least on paper, right? And then it's all about as we always joke that he has this twin brother, right? So yeah, one of them is excellent, the other one is very inconsistent and just stinks. But it's all about finding that consistency, and at the end of the day, though, I would say that it's actually the floor raiser. So the on the opposite end of the conversation, those players can give you an outlook of how strong the actual system is, because when with the ceiling raisers, those players can help Barca reach a new level, a higher level, and even punch above their weight, I would say. But they're not the players that on whom a system should depend. So you have the Dembélés and Pedris, but better players, I keep saying this all the time on Twitter, better players don't make the system, they only enhance the system. So the flow raisers, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? That's what I say. So Barca is as strong as their Sergio Robertos or Marcos Alonso. So no disrespect to them, but in those moments, if
Hey,
the
just a little
profiles,
bit. I mean, I watched Marcos Alonso in El Clasico like a week ago. Just a little bit. Yeah, yeah. No. Some
but
disrespect.
yeah. So I guess Barca's system is as strong as they are, and in those moments, if the profiles are right and your talent ID is on point, because you have to remember, both Sergio Roberto and Marcos Alonso and Frank Kessie, all those players are either they're all Xavi's vicious. He wanted Roberto to renew, he wanted Kessie, he wanted Alonso. Those players are his. He picked them, so the system as a whole has to enhance the individual, and they become more than just the sum of their parts. And that's what this whole Barca team is all about. They have to be more than the sum of their parts, because individually they're not really spectacular when it comes to the substitute, the fringe players. So in that way, I would say that it's. I mean, it's the floor raisers that have to make this, make the kind of how do I even put it? They actually show the actual quality of the system, because
Well,
I don't. Yeah.
well, I'll just say here's the bad news: is that Ansu
Yeah.
Fati and Ferran Torres. I don't even know of the two examples you're giving with Raphinha
Yeah.
and Dembele, which totally makes sense to me. Ansu and Ferran, I don't know which versions are they supposed to raise your ceiling? Maybe
Mm.
I think that's the expectations for them. That Ferran Torres was
Yes.
bought for the number he was bought to raise your ceiling, and that
Mm.
Ansu, if he is going to be a superstar, if he is the number 10 for Barcelona, he also raises your ceiling. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, those two have lowered the floor this season. I mean, that is
Yeah.
what Barcelona are considering for Ansu Fati. And it's interesting because Ansu, 7 goals and 3 assists total this season
Mm.
in 1,524 minutes total. As I mentioned, those 1,500 minutes, you'd expect more from him. And I
Yeah.
think for Ansu, it is continuing to be the weight of expectations. And I talked about him aplenty in the previous week. So I'm going to let you weigh in on Ansu more than me, because again, like the only update I have on a difference of Ansu take is I had said last week, I think Ansu is as good as gone this summer. I would not sell Ansu, but the way that 40 million euros, that number, that particular number was leaked, that Jorge Mendes might start having conversations at that number, that tells me that I think that's quite far down the line. His father coming out and saying what he said, I think that gives me the indication that Ansu is more than a 1 foot already out the door. That Barcelona have already said, your production has not been up to snuff, and you are one of the players that we are not willing to part with, but able to part with. Because even looking and comparing his contract with Ferran Torres, because FC Barcelona got Ferran Torres the way they did, which again, remember, I hate the stupid, oh my gosh, like Twitter's so frustrating. You're there. Twitter's so frustrating because you have to say the same people who seem to ignore something, and then they say the same thing a billion times, and that catches fire again, and we repeat the same cycle. And the Ferran Torres thing, him and Julian Alvarez, those deals were not the same. Julian Alvarez was signed for 17 million upfront, yes, with bonuses on a previous deal with River Plate, okay? Barcelona were never in the market to get Julian Alvarez for 17 million euros. That was not going to happen. Instead, due to stretching out Ferran Torres's contract over the course of 5 years to get him into that salary structure and sign him in January, they signed him for 55 million plus 10 million bonus, which again, amortized over the course of those 5 seasons, allowed them to fit him in the salary structure and allowed them to put that transfer on their balance sheet. Now, that was to finish top 4 in the Liga, which he helped them do, okay? However, because those deals are so long, because it had to be done, again, this is one of those things where I'm not it sounds like I'm like giving Ferran Torres a pass or even giving Barcelona a pass. But I'm saying is Barcelona made decisions that they had to because their backs were against the wall because, again, of Bartomeu and an idiot regime for too long put Barcelona in this mess. So Ferran Torres is a mess. His contract is a mess. What they're dealing with is a mess. He doesn't make too much on the wage bill. That's why they could fit him in. But now, to sell him, that means they have to amortize 40 million for that signing. And if you're another club, you're saying, well, we're going to start the negotiations at 35. We know what you have to recoup to make sure that he's positive on the balance sheet because they cannot take a loss on the balance sheet for Ferran Torres. So now you left with the only option is a loan with an option to buy. And you're saying, well, if we have to even pay part of that loan on part of his salary, what's the point of having him playing somewhere else and stinking up the joint and lowering his transfer market, or at least keep him in the Barcelona crest, which immediately, whether you want to admit it or not, having him in that crest does increase the value of a player by having him play for FC Barcelona and then potentially find a way to amortize that or to sell him later on in that contract. So there's this place where I say, for Raphinha, you check the market, see what you can get for him. He's gone. Ansu, if it's 40, the club is going to cut their losses and say this player's lost him. Or I want to mention too, that there is a good notion, again, I follow other leagues as well, and there's a good notion that Barcelona have a medical report that is not released to the public, that is protecting the player, that Barcelona knows more than we do, and Ansu's camp knows more than we do about Ansu's long-term health. And I've said before, with those injuries, you do not come back from as the same player. And my concern is that Ansu post-Barcelona, not only is he this ghost of himself or whatever, but the injured player or the damaged good that he is might be more real even at 20 than we think it is. Because if you say for Barcelona to sell one of your own for 40 million at the age of 20, looking at his strike rates in previous seasons, right? I'm doing that on 1 year, on saying, hey, you're healthy, you were coming back this year, but after 7 goals and 3 assists in 1,500 minutes, that's not good enough. You've got to go. Like, that tells me I think the club knows more about his long-term health than they're letting on, and they're trying to sell high at 40 million based on a certain medical report. Not to get all like conspiracy Dan on you, but I'm saying is like a 20-year-old player that, again, was raised in your academy for 10 years, for 40 million, 1,500 minutes, like 10 goal contributions. I mean, that stinks. That's bad. It's worse because Ferran Torres also stunk. It's worse because Raphinha doesn't fit the function of a 1v1 dribbler on the right side. That didn't help. Pedri's injuries didn't help. Lewandowski's injuries didn't help. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I just, that's what I sit with Ansu, but I think the club is going to try to sell high. And again, because of Ferran Torres, they're stuck with what they have.
Well, that's actually a good point. I've not really thought about it that way. But yeah, 40 million to me always sound like way too low. But when you put it that way, the way you just explained, I think it does make sense because he's a player who's been given the number 10 as well. So you would think Barca put a lot onto his shoulders. They thought that he would be the next number 10, right? So to suddenly just bet him like that, just let him take 40 million for such a player, it does sound a bit sketchy. So you could be onto something. I don't know, but it does sound plausible to me at this point.
I
The
don't
worst.
take my tin hats out very often, Domagoj. So
Mm.
I don't get all conspiracy Dan very often, but I don't know. I feel like I'm like 50-50. They're not that crazy, the
Mm,
conspiracies.
Yeah, because he is 20, and people keep saying that he's only 20. He can still kind of bounce back, and he should be given time. But at the same time, I think, given the situation, his age might actually be working against him. Because imagine you're a 20-year-old, and you've been through so much. Your body has been through so much. Your mind has been through so much, and he can be as mature as he wants to be, but that has an impact on you as not as a football player, as a human being, right? So how much can he take and just keep staying the same, the same player that he was in the past? And the worst thing is, looking at the numbers and the chances created, and expected goals and stuff like that, he's still producing. His differential is horrible, right? He's getting into chances, he's not finishing the chances. That's the big thing about Ansu. And finishing has always been what he's all about, right? He's scoring those goals from impossible angles and impossible situations, and he's still moving well. Well, not always, but he still has the feeling for that goal. He still has the feeling to get into that position to score. He just doesn't score. So you would think that if that feeling has stayed with him, that he would be able to eventually produce. But we've been saying the same thing about Ferran Torres as well. These numbers that he's been producing are so low, but the way the eye test tells you that he's still the type of player who gets into chances often, right? And if you would think that eventually those chances and the conversion would kind of balance out. He would start scoring goals, and I was always under the impression that as long as he kept doing what he's doing, he would start scoring goals, and I still believe that to be true. But it's been too long, right, for Ferran Torres. It's been so long that Ferran has to stop being this idea of a player, because in my mind he's this useful profile, this utility player who can create, and who can score, who can do a lot of good from that left wing. Because remember, for a while with who was it? It was Ferran Torres, it was Jordi Alba and Pedri on the left side, and for a while that looked really, really good. Barca's left side was really productive because all those three players kind of were meshed perfectly, because you had Ferran Torres, who moves well, and then you had Alba on the left side to his left, who is a great creator, and then you have Pedro on his right, who's also a great creator. So you put Ferran Torres, who moves well and who gets into positions well, next to two elite creators. So in theory, Ansu Fati should also kind of benefit from the same, from a similar setup, from a setup where he's not the wide winger, where he's closer to goal, where he's sort of a second striker sort of thing, or inverted forward, whatever you want to call it. And he has to be next to two creators, and maybe you have Raphinha on the other side, or you have Messi on the other side. I don't know, someone who kind of sends those passes from the other side. And in that situation, he should be able to produce, right? And if at that point the production is still limited or minimal, whatever you want to call it, then that's cause for concern. But at the moment, people keep saying, well, why would you change the whole system just to accommodate one player? But you're not really accommodating one player. You're kind of enhancing the whole system. If that left wing produces, if it starts producing, then this whole Barca team suddenly is on a different level. And now the question becomes, do Barca really invest? Do they go into the market and try and solve their left wing issue through transfers? Do we have the funds to do that? Is it really priority, or I don't know, a pivot or a right back or whatever you want to? Because there are holes in this team still that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, so you asked the perfect question. But it's actually a previous question you asked. I think it's yes. Who up top are you looking to accommodate? Who is the function of that forward line? And what's interesting is that Gabi is the inside forward, right? If we did view him this season, because it's kind of almost been half and half, it should not be forgotten that Xavi's preferred formation this year was with Gabi, Pedri, De Jong, and Busquets all starting together. So Gabi, if viewed as a forward, as a inside forward on the left side, he only contributed 2 goals and 6 assists this season. 1 goal and 2 assists of which came in the Spanish Super Cup in almost 2,900 minutes. But he is the example of function. We do not expect that of him to increase those numbers, at least yet. I mean, based on his age and based on the function of that position, we see what Gabi's job is to do, and Gabi does his job, almost too much of a fault where he's getting himself in trouble all the time. But he does what he's asked to do in 2,900 minutes this season, without goal contributions by and large. So if we're considering that as a left wing spot as well, based on how Xavi's going to go forward with this, because again, if you renew Busquets and a pivot isn't on the way, which it doesn't seem like a starting pivot is going to come in, because again, I've been skeptical about this idea that Amrabat would, even if Amrabat comes in, he is a piece potentially to help you out. But I don't know if he steps into your starting lineup and helps you win the Champions League. Like, again, this project is way off on that. So I don't know if that 26-year-old fully formed player does exactly that, right? Maybe he even takes some starts away from Busquets. But as I said, in the function, against Girona, you saw what Busquets does at still an elite level. And if Xavi finds that Busquets has functioned in his system, which he probably does, then Busquets is still going to be in tow. But to your point about who is the heliocentric attacker, if you will, right? And who's arriving? Well, we're talking this season about who's worked best with Lewandowski. And because Dembele and Pedri are those answers, the minute those two are gone, then not only is Lewandowski hurt, yes, that's a little bit of an excuse, but still, with Dembele and Pedri in tow, I think even a hobbled Lewandowski still would have been contributing quite a lot more since the World Cup, or since that knock against Bayern, or since that game against Bayern Munich. I think you're talking about trying to create an attack that facilitates into Lewandowski, which is what helped them win the Liga to a certain point. But again, you lose two of those pieces, and then you're dead in the water. And then again, there is that Messi question. That Messi's arrival means you basically have to change everything that we just talked about in regards to the wings, right? Basically everything, with the exception of the only solution, if you will, is that if you have Messi and choose to put him on the right, and then you put Gabi and Pedri and De Jong in supporting him in a 4-3-3, and Messi is your right winger, if you will, that means that left winger has got to be Dembele. Dembele has got to be that left winger who is wide at all times. And you're switching everything. You're overloading on the right, and you're moving out to the left. And then Balde, being a forward-thinking left back, if you will, is supportive to that idea as well, because he and Dembele then have to have their partnership at a perfect level. And you're inversing the entire system to accommodate Messi coming in from the right side. And you talked about, one of the reasons you're on the show right now is you wrote a book about tactically what you do with Messi and how that works out. And so there's so many questions about the idea of Messi. Is that who works best with those two, that being Lewandowski and Messi together? Who works best with Messi? Who works best with Lewandowski, right? And if Messi isn't to arrive, as you look forward to next year, because not to bring up more problems for you, but Gabi, Balde, Araujo, and Inigo Martinez, who seems to have signed for Barcelona, they are all going to be waiting for their new deals to be fit into FFP. And FFP is going to go up. Those deals are going to be put under the cap. But just the concerns about getting those fit in the financial wage structure and sorting all that out financially, you have to worry about that before you ever consider a Messi or anybody else that could plug into this team for function's sake. So, not to be all doom and gloom and look at worst case scenario, but worst case scenario, who you're talking about musical chairs wise to solve these problems may be them. Like, there is this world where Raphinha and Ansu are out and just Messi is in. Right. And so now you're talking about moving those pieces around into a situation that get the best out of everybody. And, again, that's Xavi's problem more than ours. He's smarter than we are, but it's consideration and concern that is there enough players to even solve your problems?
It's tough because if Messi comes in and he's your right winger, of course, so you have Dembele on the left, he's the width provider. You have Balde, who's also, as you say, attack minded, so they two can kind of alternate because Dembele can go in, he can go out, and you have Balde who's in support who can kind of complement his movement. But what happens on the right side? Because Messi comes in, obviously he's not the width holder, he should not be holding width. But if you don't have a right winger who holds width, and you don't have a right back who holds width, then what happens is you don't have any width on the right. And that's a problem because, it becomes very easy to defend against, right? But then again, at the same time, if you buy a right back who's like overlapping right back, attacking right back, which people have been saying, if Messi comes in, we need an overlapping right back. But what happens then is you're too exposed on the right side. You have Messi and you have an overlapping right back. Who's going to defend? Why do you think that Ivan Rakitic was the Messi's bodyguard type of player? Because that needed to happen for the whole system to function. Because without Rakitic, it all falls apart. Because he drifts wide when necessary. He runs for Busquets and for Messi, and I don't know who's going to do that in this current setup.
Well, 'cause I was going to say with De Jong has done that in
Yeah.
the past. Like last season under
Mm,
Koeman, De Jong went sideline to
mm,
sideline and
yeah.
would try to be one of those players who facilitated with,
Mm,
but that does not fit him at all. Like we have
no.
seen, like the example is that like having De Jong do that job, because again, now we're
Mm,
going down the list. Who's going to
mm,
do certain jobs? And as you
yeah.
mentioned, De Jong seems to be one of those people that is going to be
Yeah.
tasked to do that behind Messi, and that
Yeah.
did not work. We saw that
No.
Messi and De Jong know each other. They've overlapped. Like it did not
Mm,
work the first time.
mm,
And what is the definition of insanity? Is doing the same thing over and over
same
again
thing.
and thinking you're going to get a
Mm.
different result. I think that sets De Jong back, way back on his course.
It does. It sets back everyone because whoever you choose for that role, he's basically getting sacrificed because he's not doing anything that he's supposed to be doing, like what his profile is all about. Because De Jong is not meant to be tracking back for Messi or covering for Messi. He's meant to be doing the progression thing. He's meant to be at the hub of our midfield, but he won't be doing that if he's tracking back for Messi. So it creates a big problem, especially when you consider, people have been saying this is an obvious thing about our pressing, but it's true. I mean, if Messi is in that team, you have to reconsider the whole defensive system because this whole high press, high aggression, high intensity man marking system is not going to work. And if you try to do it, you're gonna lose. First of all, you're gonna waste Messi. But second of all, even if you use Messi in that role, the press is not going to be effective. So
And that's a worry about those step backs that we're talking about, right? That
yeah,
Barcelona's
yeah,
press and their defensive system is what won them the Liga this season. But we
yeah,
know that system, both that high press, I mean, we watched Bayern
mm,
Munich not have it
yeah,
up to standard against Man City. So that high press and that defensive system is nowhere near good enough to compete in
yeah,
Europe yet, right? But
yeah,
that's a project you hope to take steps forward with. And you're right, like
exactly.
this would be a fear, an example. This is not just Messi, but yeah,
Mm,
losing that ability to press at the high level that they have this season, that again allow them to have the function to win the
mm,
Liga, you would then lose that. So then you're taking a step back. Like you're taking a huge step back without, again,
mm,
a team that functionally has a lot of pieces swapped in and out to support a team with Messi and Lewandowski in it. And as we kind of wind the show down, the last two players I want to bring up that I don't think solve this problem at all, like Yannick Carrasco, I don't know how he solves that problem in any way that we just talked about function wise. Is he a left winger? Is he a left wing back? I'm not sure, if Barcelona has either use for what he contributes, though, because 6 goals and 3 assists in 35 matches this season, playing over 2,000 minutes. He'll be 30 in September. And a stat we used earlier, that non-penalty XG plus X assists or XG on assists is 6.8, putting him just above Dembele and lower than Ansu and Torres. So it's not like you're going to be expecting to get goal contributions if you play him as your left winger. Like he fights hard and he defends, sure. And at 15 million euro purchase clause due to the Memphis deal, Barcelona feel like they're getting a quality, good player. And maybe they do feel like for a much cheaper option, you're replacing Ansu's production with a player who, yes, he's 10 years older, but I mean, he also, again, maybe they think they can get 3 good years out of him that they might not get out of Ansu. Again, that's a conspiracy brain. But even on paper, they're getting a player for, we'll argue, almost half the price potentially on the wages that they had Ansu for. And they're getting a similar amount of production. And you're getting a left winger that you can just kind of trust to eat up minutes. Because again, that's what winning the league is about. It's about having guys you can put on the field that just, I mean, again, that is arguably Busquets' greatest gift is that guy just is on the field. He just eats up minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes and does enough great things over the course of every season that you're like, okay, there he is. And when you get to Europe and those minutes turn to moments, he gets exposed, right, for being what he is and the function that he cannot do and the things that his teammates are again not facilitating the way that Messi and Xavi and Iniesta used to do for him, right? And he's being asked to do more, and he can't do those things. But then the last player I want to mention here is Abde, right? Because he's another left wing answer that I want to bring up before we close. He has 5 goals and 2 assists in 26 matches, 1,348 minutes total as a 21-year-old. The pro to bring back Abde is that he is dirt cheap. They got him for nothing from Heracles, and even restructuring his contract, he's a player that, I mean, to say happy to be there, he's a player that was of a status where he's being paid to be happy to be there at the moment until that deal is restructured. The good news is he's the 99th percentile in successful take-ons, which again, you watch him play and you're like, okay, that makes sense. 3.67 times per matches he successfully takes on an attacker. However, he is in the 34th percentile in touches in the attacking penalty box, which does not support Xavi's high press attacking system. Now, Osasuna, you have to work hard. It's not like they sit in a low block, though. They sit in a medium block, and they are a top third team in pressing in the Liga. So that number is still low in that category. Again, but 1,300 minutes, give or take. And then 95th percentile in progressive carries, which is, again, pretty positive. But he's in the 18th percentile in progressive passing, which is, not only worrying to me, but if he wants immediate death threats by Kool-Aids, he'll just stay at that number. 18th percentile in progressive passing is a great way to get absolutely destroyed by Kool-Aids in the stand and at home. He's also 12th percentile in pass completion, 68%, which again is not a function of Osasuna's system. It's a function of what he's asked to do in Osasuna's system, which is to take on players and to make mistakes in the final third, right? Because a lot of his passing is potentially leading to a goal, but it's not, right? Because again, going to his 5 goals and 2 assists, which should be, in theory, a lot higher based on the eye test and the success he has. His non-penalty XG plus expected assists per game, like I just mentioned, it's 3.3, half of Dembele's. My concern is that the idea of Abde is great because you watch him for Osasuna and I go, heck yeah, bring this kid back, 21 years old, look at him take on everyone. It's gonna break open those numerical advantages on the left side. Lewandowski's gonna be wide open, 1v1 in the box. You're gonna leave Dembele more wide open on the right because they cannot, unless they're playing 5 at the back or low block, anybody in a 4-4 are going to have to bring extra help to Dembele, but then Abde is going to be wide open for those 1v1s. How exciting is that player? I'm just concerned when it comes to the numbers and his even overall production that he is going to frustrate because he can do 90% of the job, but the 10% he cannot do and never has been able to do so far. Again, he's only been a professional for 2 years, which is, again, I guess a good sign because you could still loan him out for another year and you see where he goes. Because I think he's definitely made strides. He's made improvements this year. Yeah. But I don't know how many improvements he can make with total goal contributions, which is the only way he returns to Barcelona.
Yeah, that's a good point because, well, as you said, we have to consider the whole context and the team styles. You would think that both Carrasco and Abde would have somewhat of a higher productivity than they have at the moment in the current clubs, and they both suffer from the same things. Carrasco is also a creator more than he is someone who's a finisher or even who has a high quality end product, if you will. And Abde is the same. But if you look at those two players and if they offered a similar thing, although at the moment Carrasco is the more refined player, more stable, even more consistent, but at the same time, if they're a very similar profile. On one hand, you have a 30-year-old, and on the other hand, you have a 20-year-old. I mean, you would think that you would go for the younger player for a long-term project to groom him and to make him into a player that you want him to be. I mean, it's tough. It's tough, but I would lean towards Abde. I think just because he can be a ceiling raiser for Barcelona. If we're still on the topic of ceiling raiser versus floor raisers.
I mean, it's funny because I didn't even think we were asking. That was the question I thought we were asking. Like, sorry, my thing was, I don't want Carrasco. Don't bring him to Barcelona. And the question was, would Abde make sense? And, again, going back to Ferran Torres' number, Ferran has 6 goals and 2 assists in 1,600 minutes. Abde has 5 goals and 2 assists in 1,300 minutes. So, I mean, yeah, like if you can move Ferran Torres, just for goodness sake, just bring Abde back. Like again, if you expect Abde to be more than what Abde is, you're going to be disappointed, right? But that's what I'm saying. If you see him for what he is, and you're gonna let him frustrate you because of what he doesn't do, then Abde makes sense. Because again, I think even production wise, that is how unfortunate the situation with the output from Ferran Torres and Ansu has been this year. Again, my conspiracy brain about Ansu has all those points, but for Ferran Torres, I mean, because I'm with you, it's the idea of that player and the idea of Abde. At least the idea of Abde produces enough to get it over the line. All I'm going to have to do is constantly defend him and say, if you're expecting some kind of greater output than what you're getting, you're going to be disappointed, but he's going to do what he does really, really well, which is be a 99th percentile for all wingers in world football on successful takeoff, like of 1v1 situations, which is the opposite of the eye test of what Kool-Aids are seeing from Raphinha this season. So, I mean, again, if you're expecting him to be the sixth attacker next year, sure, but that's the tough thing. If you can't move Ferran Torres, then, I mean, do you bring Abde back? I don't think you do, just because you take 20 or 30 million for Abde. At this point, I think he might be worth 25 million for Brighton or for a team who's looking to finish potentially in a Europa League spot in the Premier League. I think that's what, West Ham, like one of those clubs with a little bit of money to spend in the Premier League, that Abde is going to give it his best shot, right? In a league that is all about, you know what I mean, getting on those wings and successful take-ons and things like that.
Well, another thing is, I fully believe that the trident of Balde, Gavi, and De Jong can do much more than they've been doing so far. I think there is a scenario in which Xavi can optimize that trio to be much, much more productive than they are, because the way they move, the way they interact, they're all three players are fairly creative. They don't really have the final pass, the final ball yet, but they have enough creativity, enough quality among those three players to produce much more than they have been producing. And that's a topic I will explore more in the future, but it's a very complicated topic. But you can see the way they move, the way they time their runs. You can see Xavi is not happy with that, especially with Gavi, how he moves, how he interacts with those two players. It's not there yet. It's not where it needs to be. But that left half space is often the place, the area where the game can be won, and where Barca can create an advantage, but they don't. So I feel like there is a world in which we don't dip into the market to find a solution for our problem, because our solution is actually already at the club. It just needs to be more refined. So I feel like there is a scope for that as well. But the way we are kind of approaching this problem is that it needs to be fixed by new players, new arrivals, and given our financial situation, I don't think that's how we should be approaching it. But
in the long term too, the club, I think, is asking hard questions like, what is Angel Alarcon? What is he going to give you in the future? He's 18 now. He's supposed to be a U19 player. And Lamine Yamal is going to be 16 next year, and he's going to be able to play for the first team. I mean, he was technically he's able, but they don't play 15-year-olds. So at 16, I mean, they want to renew him. What is his ceiling? What is his timeline? Because I think, again, the argument is Messi sets you back. I mean, Messi for 1 year does a lot for you, but also potentially sets you back on this project of winning a Champions League. Because again, I think the idea is that with all the holes in the squad and the function of the squad, bringing Messi back is for bringing Messi back. It's for the vibes and the good faith, and it doesn't return Barcelona to winning glory. I mean, you'd hope that they can win the league again next year, but what it does do is that it does the right thing. It brings the greatest player in football history back to Barcelona in the right way, and kind of ends that storybook, right? And it gets Laporta the support that he wants. It gets him the good vibes that he wants around the club as they play at Montjuic, as they struggle with, with FFP in Spain and all those things. But again, if they really can believe and say, all right, Lamine Yamal, like, here's his plan. Here's the 15 games. I mean, not picking him on the schedule, but saying, like, he's going to get 10 to 12 games next season. Alarcon this year is he's at 5 appearances or something, 4 appearances, whatever it is. Next year, he's going to make 20 appearances off the bench, right? In the 50 matches we have on the schedule. And maybe we'll front load some of those in the start of campaign, like usually happens. Players come back late, preseason, whatever, even though there's no international competitions, and you can front load some of those matches for those young players, see what they got. Because if they trust in those players, then it does calm everything down a little bit. But again, you also can't foretell the future as for teenagers, because again, Ansu's 20. So it seems like every argument I make, Domagoj, we could just do this for hours and hours and hours and hours.
I guess so, yeah.
About, there's an exception to every idea and rule and planning or whatever. But Domagoj, thanks so much. I was worried that you and I would only do like 15 minutes on the wingers, but as was expected, we were able to talk for just the wingers and that situation, because as we speak about, to put a bow on it, it is so complicated. That position at Barcelona is what I think more than any other, when you look at who's in this team now with Araujo and Koundé and Christensen, right back is what it is. But again, Koundé's been playing there. And Balde, you look at De Jong and Pedri and Gabi and what Gabi will be, what Pedri is continuing to be when healthy, and the renewed De Jong that was seen this year and what he's capable of, as you mentioned. Still potentially there might be one more little notch to go for him in Xavi's system. And then again, the function of Lewandowski, it speaks to even at his age, when healthy, it speaks to the point that the wingers and that spot are the ones that can take Barcelona to the next stratosphere. Like if Barcelona do not get ample contributions from their wing spots, they will not get past the group stage of the Champions League next season. But if Barcelona and Xavi can raise the ceiling or the floor, again, you taught me that. I'm going to reverse that. If Xavi can raise the floor of the winger positions for next season, then Barcelona can get out of the group stage. But if it is still as nil as it was this year, it is going to be quite difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that. And when you look at the box formation that we make with Xavi, we have the winger making the box, but when you look at Arteta and Pep, they always make the fullback, the right back usually makes the box. They don't sacrifice the front line to make that box to get more control in midfield. We do, and that's why our output suffers and theirs doesn't. But at the same time, even if we do make a box with a right back, with Koundé, for example, who is capable of doing it, then in that case you need a left winger who will kind of warrant that, that change. If you have a left winger who is not going to do anything with, in his position, then it's not worth it to make that change. But at the same time, that would be an option for Barcelona as well, to kind of give more firepower to the team and then still retain that control that they want with 4 midfielders and in a box. Well, 3 midfielders and right back in that case. So there's an option of that as well. And maybe that could also kind of amplify Fati, for example, if he's the winger, the inverted forward, and then you put 2 creators alongside him. Maybe, but that's a conversation for a different time, I guess.
Yeah, as we've been going through, I think what makes it more difficult is that there is such a tightrope that Barcelona have so little funds to bring in new players, and there's little ideas. Because again, like you talk about a Bernardo Silva, if he were to come, like it changes everything, changes the entire calculus of everything that we just talked about. There are players like that. If they were able to bring in a high, we don't talk about wingers. I know people want about free agent in Marcus Thuram, but like that's not going to happen. So if there were like high level wingers on the way, like one big one that the Barcelona wanted and they brought him in, then that would be one thing. But that player's not coming. But no,
I don't think so.
No. But speaking of big ones, that we're not going to talk about this. I'll push this off for another show. But Ede Hedeberg was the prolific Norwegian goal scorer for Lyon, was linked with Barcelona. And listen, if they want to keep throwing money at their Feminine team, I am all for it. Again, like as I keep saying, the numbers for the Feminine, I think Barcelona continue to invest in that way. Again, the what they pay the women's team, the pay scale for women's football is still so low. It barely is a drop in the pan for the costs and expenses of everything for the men's team. So continue to just put these investments in the women's game, and it is going to bear fruit. Like 95,000 people on multiple occasions now have told you at the Camp Nou that there's going to be investment. So I don't care about, it sounds crazy, but I'm happy that the board and everybody is turning the Feminine into the Galacticos. Yep. Great. Yep. Do it. Do it. I want to see a Feminine Galacticos at this moment. Just do it, because they also have an academy that's above that's above most of the others outside of England. And just keep pouring and sloshing as much money in there, win those Champions League, create your dynasty. And I'm excited about all that. So anyway, all right. So wrapping it all up, Domagoj, as always, I like to plug your book. It'll be down in the show notes below. And people can follow you on Twitter. So thanks so much for coming back to the show.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
All right. And we are everywhere, as you know, as well. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, closed Facebook group, Patreon, YouTube, and the merch store. All right. Got it. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And for Barca.